was an American, so it seemed only fair to shoot him. I'd already winged the beggar once, somewhere in the region of his flabby calves, and was now in hot pursuit, with the tenacity for which I'm mildly famous, clinging to the running board of a motor car, wind whipping at my face, positively pelting through the choked streets of Manhattan. Ahead of me loomed the gorgeous elegance of the new Chrysler building, thrusting like a sword into the brilliant blue sky. For those of you not in the know, and dear me, where have you been? My name is Lucifer Box, portrait painter, occasional memoir scribbler, and agent, most secret, for His Majesty's government. Sad it is to relate that my artistic career was somewhat in the doldrums. Even the landed gentry who had once positively drenched me in commissions seemed enthralled to the damned new religion of photography. And so here was I, the gorgeous butterfly of King Bertie's reign, middle-aged and rather neglected, though my figure was still as trim as a boy's, thank you very much. Happily, I had other interests, and when not exhibiting my daubs to an increasingly bored public, I was engaged, as I've said, doling out death and violence as gleefully as I did crimson alizarin or Mars yellow. Well, every man should have a hobby. The chap I'd been assigned to bump off on this charming December day was called Hubbard. Hubbard the Cupboard, don't you know? His curious moniker coming not only from his ungainly shape, but from his being a dealer in stolen goods. It was said Hubbard's cupboard was never bare. The fat fool, however, had strayed from his usual territory and was now the brains behind an influx of cheap cocaine that was currently drowning New York's night spots. So before the hooters of all the hoofers were irretrievably rotted, Hubbard was to be removed from the scene forthwith. Dropping from the running board as the car slowed down, I followed the trail of the fat man's blood across the sidewalk and found myself in a light-starved courtyard. At its centre stood a quaint little clapboard church, fragile and unremarkable, save for the bright red polka-dot pattern on the steps. The door to the church was slightly ajar. I had him. I slipped inside and saw a narrow spiral stair leading to the bell tower. Stealing upwards, my gloved hand gripping my Webley, I emerged into a beam-ceilinged chamber where two great copper-green bells hung in their housings. There was no sign of my quarry. Suddenly there was something startlingly cold at my flesh, and every instinct thrilled as I felt a coil of piano wire loop about my throat. My hand flew to my collar, just as the wire tightened, allowing vital room for manoeuvre. I gasped as the deadly lasso bit into the leather of my glove and my pistol went crashing down the stairwell. Still the noose tightened, jerking my elbow repeatedly backwards. I met only empty air as Hubbard the Cupboard swung clear. There was a cold, bright zing as the razor wire sliced cleanly through my glove and ripped at the flesh of my hand. Yelling in agony, I dropped to my knees and reached frenziedly behind me until my fingers found the rusty end of a bent nail. I prized it from the planking and rammed it with main force into my enemy's leg. Hubbard screamed, stumbled forwards, and suddenly the wire noose slackened. I rolled away, leapt to my feet and kicked my fat assailant in his lardy throat, sending the brute flying backwards into the bell housing. At once the great shapes rolled in their gimbals. Hubbard, broad as a meat locker, tried desperately to right himself, but the bells moved like quicksand beneath him.
"This ain't right,"
he squawked, his little feet scrabbling comically at the wooden housing.
"It's a set-up!"
Then suddenly a small, snub-nosed revolver appeared in his fat hand. He wasn't intending to go down alone. When the shot rang out, I was surprised to feel no pain whatsoever. It took me a while to realize that this was intimately bound up with the fact that Hubbard now boasted a capacious hole in his temple, from which startlingly papal white smoke was pouring. Hubbard gurgled most unpleasantly, and then made his final foray between the bells, tumbling to the church floor below, and setting the wretched things pealing gaily, as though for Christmas Mass. A cold sweat prickled all over me as I turned to greet my rescuer. "You're getting slow, old boy," said the lean, brown newcomer, stepping into the light. "Hello, Percy," I said lightly. "Thanks. "Least I can do," he grinned, tipping his trilby onto the back of his head, "for the great Lucifer box." Then a clammy sickness gripped me, and the great Lucifer box collapsed onto the planking in a dead faint. I woke to a biting pain in my hand. I was stretched out in a pew, and the place was abuzz with what I knew to be domestics, those terribly useful folk who clean up after chaps like me who've been splattering hemoglobin all over the furniture. Percy Flarge was dressing my wound and smiling infuriatingly. I flexed my digits to assess the damage. "Thanks for the repair job, Percy, but I have orders to bring back everything Hubbard had on him. I trust you took care to—" "Oh, I've taken care of all that," he interrupted. "Have you now? Is the body still here?" "Oh, yes. You want to pay your last respects, old love?" Flarge handed me a pocket torch and led me outside into the yard, where a tumble-down outhouse had been pressed into service as a temporary morgue. We went inside, and I began to search Hubbard's corpse. More than anything, I wanted to spot something that young pup Flarge had missed. I'd almost given up when I spotted the handkerchief. In sharp contrast to the dead man's vile tailoring, the wipe was made of an exquisite ivory-coloured silk of obvious antiquity. It was folded into 3 neat triangles like a miniature mountain range, and there seemed to be some sort of exotic pattern on it. It might be a mere trifle, but trifles ain't to be sniffed at when you've not even been invited to the party. Flarge was watching me closely. I cleared my throat and straightened up as though satisfied. Then I gasped suddenly, as though in pain, and dropped the torch. "Sorry," I managed through gritted teeth. "Damned wound." As Flarge bent down to retrieve the torch, I swiftly whipped the handkerchief from Hubbard's breast pocket, stuffing it into my trousers, just as the boy bobbed back up. "You get yourself to bed now, Mr. Box, do you hear?" he said with a horrible grin. "Then perhaps get on the boat back to England. After all, it's nearly Christmas." I smiled tightly and stalked off into the gathering snowstorm, the silken rag tucked firmly into my pocket. I've dealt with art and its shortcomings. Now, as promised, we shall examine the state of my other pursuit, namely espionage. Once again, for the newcomers, I must devote a short passage to the Royal Academy of Arts, that bastion of the establishment in London's Piccadilly. But strip away the facade of Burlington House, and you'll uncover a seething hotbed of plotting, counterplotting, and assassination. For the R.A. is the true face of His Majesty's Secret Service. Not that other lot, of whom you may vaguely have heard, the blighters who go around destabilising perfectly friendly democracies or knocking off the nabob of whatchamacallit. As I've said, to me it was always the merest hobby of a dilettante, a little like collecting stamps or mounting Red Admirals, although my exploits amongst the Russian Navy will have to wait for another day. No, from my youthful adventures at the tail end of the old Queen's reign to my ill-starred work against the Boche during the last big show, I reckoned myself one of the brightest and best of the academicians, trotting merrily from continent to continent, cutting, thrusting, daring, and doing. Now, though, the game seemed to be full of arrogant young bloods like the odious Percy Flarge, an athletic Cambridge blue of little discernible charm. At first I'd taken him for one of the legion of doe-eyed admirers who have crossed my path over the years. But then came a change of regime at the top, and Flarge's attitude began, subtly at first, to alter. Sly jibes here, stifled giggles there. Surely old Boxy was past his best. Time for younger talents to take the lead. Of course, what really rankled was the fear that the loathsome creature was right. Back in my hotel room, I threw off coat and hat, reached into my trousers, pulled out Hubbard's silken rag, and carefully unfolded it onto one of the pillows. Though roughly handkerchief-shaped, it had clearly been torn from a much larger piece of material. 2 of the edges were ragged and bore crabbed text in what looked like some species of Latin. The bottom corners were highly decorated with coloured emblems, a picture of a mountain and dragons' heads, and there was a sort of fiery motif embroidered rather beautifully, the flames licking over what looked like an animal on a spit. I examined the thing until my vision swam, then decided to abandon it for the night. After all, I was almost certainly clutching at straws. Perhaps Persiflage hadn't bothered with it because it was nothing more than a snotty rag. The next day I was summoned to a meeting in the exotic Moscow tea rooms with Joshua Reynolds, the new head of the Secret Service, and not my biggest fan. He was briefly over on this side of the pond on academy business, amongst which was an outfit called Faust, the fascist Anglo-United States Tribune, an acronym so tortuous it could only be sinister. Its leader was a Yankee-born, Balliol-educated Anglophile called Olympus Mons, whose acolytes styled themselves the Amber Shirts. "And you want me to kill him?" I said. Reynolds' guffaw almost knocked over his coffee pot.
"I'm afraid such a task will, in future, be left in safer hands. No, you're merely to observe his activities. We've a lead of sorts. One of Mons's Amber Shirts seems to have grave doubts about his leader, wants to tell all."
"Where do I meet him?" Reynolds tossed over a slip of paper. On it was a neatly typed message. "You, Robespierre. Me, Peter Pan. 99, 8:30. And with a flick of the wrist, I was dismissed into the bleak December day. Night-time found me motoring upstate, dressed as the renowned French revolutionary. I was grateful the message hadn't suggested Danton, as I wouldn't have been able to fit the bathtub into the Cadillac. My destination was a disused aerodrome, final resting place of the splendid R-99 airship, and now one of New York's swellest speakeasies. The 99 was the place to be seen, albeit in fancy dress. I parked the car in front, alongside 30 or so others, slipped on my mask and periwig, and walked through the huge doors of the main hangar. I swept as gracefully as I could through the carousing throng, passing Cleopatras, Abraham Lincolns, and a variety of gorgeously frocked queens, of the divorced, beheaded and died variety, you understand, all gyrating wildly to the strains of a jazz band. The face of our informant, Peter Pan, was unknown, but I kept my lovely eyes peeled for such a vision, or even his independent shadow shuffling along the skirting boards. All manner of fairies, nymphets and dryads pirouetted before me, the shimmering of cut-glass chandeliers speckling their lithe young bodies like sunlight through forest leaves. But there was no sign of any denizen of Neverland. Now perspiring somewhat under my antique headgear, I reached into my pantaloons for my handkerchief.
"Where'd you get that?"
I glanced up. A small white-blonde fellow, togged up as Julius Caesar, was peering at my wipe. Looking down, I realized I'd pulled out Hubbard's curious relic by mistake. The noblest Roman jabbed out a fat, hairless hand.
"May I see?"
I can recognize affected nonchalance when I see it. I took a sip of champagne. "You have some expertise," I ventured.
"A little, yes," he said mildly. "Name's Rice Muller, Professor Rice Muller. I work at the Metropolitan Museum, down in the bowels. Drop by sometime. I can give you my honest opinion on it."
"In return for what?" The little man hooked a finger over his lower lip, like a child contemplating what it might want for Christmas. Then suddenly there was a low, brown Yankee voice in my ear. "How goes the revolution?" Peter Pan was revealed, a rather strapping fellow in a challengingly short green tunic and matching tights. A feathered cap looked rather dainty on his expensively cut chestnut hair. Beneath the white half-mask, large brown eyes burned intensely. I turned back to Rice Muller, but the little man had melted away into the seething, chattering crowd. Returning my full attention to the newcomer, I found myself somewhat distracted by the impressive bulk of his thighs. He gripped my arm and pulled me aside. "Sal Volatile's the name. We got to talk, Mr. Box. About the lamb, about the prayer. But first you need to see what you're up against. You got a car?" "Wait," I cried. "What lamb? What prayer? And what has all this cryptic blether got to do with Faust?" Less than an hour later, we were back in Manhattan and seated in a spectacular kinema auditorium. Both of us now dressed alike in jodhpur-like black trousers, boots that glistened wetly like chewed licorice, and tailored silk shirts of a rather gorgeous amber hue. Fancy dress seemed to be the order of the day. All around us was a huge and expectant audience, all similarly clad in official Faust uniform. A safety curtain had been drawn down over the kinema screen, and an elaborate lectern installed before it. Dominating the whole thing was a vast black flag, draped from ceiling to stage. In its centre, a design in blazing orange, showing a double ziggurat, symbol of the movement. "All right, Mr. Volatile," I said quietly. "What was all that about back at the party? What's the lamb?" Volatile glanced quickly over his shoulder, then put a finger to his lips. On cue, a muffled drum beat began to sound, and the audience hissed themselves into silence. The drum beat slowed into a self-consciously momentous thrum, 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 and unseen cornets shrieked out in fanfare. As one mass, the crowd's heads turned back as dazzling spotlights crackled into life. "Here he comes," whispered Volatile. Now more spotlights burst into life, as the top dogs of Faust took their places on the platform and cheered to the rafters. Olympus Mons made his way to the podium. Somewhere in the early 40s, he was under 6 feet, but carried himself with an athlete's easy grace. There was a great scar running from his broken nose to his chin, so that his lip curled up in a most unpleasant fashion, permanently exposing the right dog tooth. He was handsome, in a thuggish way, but his dark eyes were hooded like those of some reptile. Hooded, that is, until, smoothing back brilliantined hair, he smiled his million-watt smile. Then the eyes seemed to grow huge, like ink spreading on a blotter, taking in the whole audience in their hypnotic range. The microphone in front of him whistled briefly, and then he spoke. "My friends, what a thrill it is for me to stand before you, knowing that, at the close of the year, efforts to strengthen our movement internationally have met with such resounding success." The voice was curiously light and had a Yankee twang of no definable origin. "For the old order is passing away," he continued. "The ancient fault lines of party politics replaced by a new model. Mankind reborn, vigorous, forward-looking, in step with a new world order." The crowd roared their approval. I shuddered at the ecstatic glitter in their wide eyes. For himself, Volatile seemed to shrink from the great man's presence, his face a picture of disgust, as though he'd smelled something that had been knocked down in the road. There was more simplistic tosh from Mons, laying into the Jews and the Bolsheviks and the capitalists, larding praise on Mussolini, some Austrian fella, old Uncle Tom Mosley and all. I found it positively vulgar. I was very aware of the throbbing of my injured hand and sought refuge in focusing on the amber-shirted figures in the shadows behind the leader. Then one face leapt out at me. My head grew suddenly clear, and I caught my breath in absolute astonishment. It was a woman, near my own age, with neatly bobbed black hair. Despite the fine angularity of her features, there was something hatchet-like and cold about them, rather as though a skilled draftsman, having designed a great beauty, had forgotten to rub out his working. It was her eyes that drew me, though. Of a peculiar, piercing blue, they were every bit as gorgeous as my own. Not surprising in the least when you consider that the woman sitting there in her neat amber-coloured shirt, gazing up at Mons with unfeigned adoration, was my sister. Pandora, my sister, after all these years. Fact is, the old sis and I had never got on. Like all the best family spats, its origins were humble enough, stretching back to the dark days when Mamma had announced, in solemn yet excited tones, that the 3-year-old me was to be blessed with a little friend. Pandora had remained unmarried, and began throwing herself with bewildering intensity behind one lunatic cause or another, ranging from the abolition of Christmas to the compulsory introduction of a fruit-only diet. We had drifted ever further apart as the years rolled by, and these days I knew little of Pan's life, save that she lived by the sea, eking out her meagre inheritance and writing pamphlets on the importance of a thrice-daily bowel movement. So really, it was no surprise to see her that night, sharing a platform with the ranting Olympus Mons. Might I somehow be able to get closer to the fellow through her? Given our state of mutual estrangement, I very much doubted it. Next day, I decided to take up my invitation from Professor Rice-Muller. Deep in the ill-lit basements of the Metropolitan Museum, the pale little man from the 99 Speakeasy pored studiously over Hubbard the Cupboard's mysterious handkerchief.
"Trouble is," he said at last, "I can't translate it."
The lamplight flashed off one lens of his spectacles, turning him into a mildly smiling electric cyclops.
In short, though the artifact appears wholly genuine, the language is gibberish. It's almost Latin, then takes another turn to become like Hebrew, then Aramaic. The words make very little sense. Some of it's a ritual, other parts, how can I put it, directions. You see, this part with the picture of the mountain, it's like a map. The ragged edges show it's the bottom corner of a larger piece of material.
Then he pointed to the images on the ragged edge of the silk.
But these markings, they're Kabbalistic.
Black magic.
Quite my line of country, don't you know? That little fellow,
he pointed to a barely discernible goatish-looking creature sitting cross-legged in one embroidered corner.
That fellow could be Banabjed, the soul of the god Osiris, his Ba. It's a ram-headed deity.
A Ba lamb? Rice-Muller chuckled.
And there are some words here that are very clear, though as to what they mean...
And what do they say? Rice-Muller held up the hanky close to his face and read from it.
There will come one who is spoken of, all unknowing will he come, and only he that makes himself alone in the world can defeat the beast. One way or another, it's an invocation.
What kind of invocation? The light caught his spectacles again, so that for an instant he appeared to have huge, blind, white eyes.
Why, for summoning the devil, of course.
Next day, I met my Faust contact Sal Volatile at a Shishi drugstore on the corner of 23rd and 5th. A long bar, studded with stools that had the appearance of upholstered mushrooms, took up the whole of one side of the place. On the opposite wall hung a huge rectangular mirror, all covered with postcards of Florida. A fat soda jerk in a white coat and silly white hat beamed at us over his siphons. I ordered 2 cups of coffee, and the fella set to work, skillfully brewing the Java without even glancing up from his sports magazine. "Well," I said, "you contacted us because you have something on Mons. What is it? You said something about a prayer and a lamb? As they say in the flickers, shoot." Volatile leant forward, and there was no mistaking the fear in his eyes. "I found the lamb," he whispered, as though I should know what he was talking about, "right under their noses. Mons is going crazy looking for it. He thinks he's on the right track, but he'll find the bird flown." A curious hissing laugh spluttered from between his teeth. I glanced across at the barman, but he was absorbed in his baseball literature. "There's only one place I'll be safe," continued Volatile, "in a church." I almost laughed, but managed to disguise my outburst by taking a gulp of coffee. Sanctuary? Volatile bit his lip, and the bristles on his unshaven chin curved upwards.
Well, not a church at all, really. The Convent of St. Bede. It's in England. I've got a passage booked out of here. Got an understanding with the captain. Pier 39, tonight at midnight. Boat called the Stookie.
Volatile leant even closer.
I want you to go instead of me. The trip's a blind. I've got other means of getting to England. You'll act as a decoy.
He handed me a sheaf of shipping documents. I looked them over. Charming. And when I get to the convent?
More coffee?
The fat soda jerk was looming over us, coffee pot in hand, beaming through the steam that poured from its pitted lid. No thanks. Look, I turned back to Volatile. Tell me about this lamb. And what's this alternative escape route of yours? If something goes wrong, I'll need to find you.
I'll get in touch, he muttered, soon as we're both in England.
No more coffee?
The soda jerk was grinning stupidly, the steam from the pot fogging his owlish glasses. No, thank you. But the fellow pushed back his spectacles from the bridge of his flat nose and shook his head.
I insist.
Suddenly he'd upended the pot, and scalding black fluid was raining down onto Volatile's hand. He yelled and jumped back from his stool. In a flash, the soda jerk had pulled a snub-nosed revolver from his apron, and the dim interior of the drugstore flashed yellow as a bullet spat out. Volatile was hit in the knee and flung backwards into the far wall, shattering the mirror. All this I observed as I grabbed Volatile's shipping documents, dropped to the floor, rolled over, my coat skirts dragging in the pool of spilled coffee, and reached for my Webley. I levelled my weapon at the soda jerk's expansive gut. He dropped his revolver and stood frozen, hands aloft, behind the counter. "All right," I said. "I presume you're working for Mons's lot. You needed to rub out that fella on the floor there before he told me all about your lord and master, eh?" He might have talked. We shall never know. Because I was just conscious of a vague movement behind me as someone emerged from the back of the drugstore, a small pinprick of pain on the back of my neck, and then a warm, fuzzy, muffled darkness as I crashed to the floor. My tongue felt like a stick in my mouth. I blinked a couple of times and focused on a tobacco-soiled ceiling and bare bulb hanging from wire that looked like a string of liver. Turning my head slightly, I found that I was resting on a rough, candy-striped pillow that had seen infinitely better days. I turned my head the other way and sat up with a yell. Sal Volatile lay naked in bed next to me, which would have been a cause for rejoicing were it not for the 3 bullet holes in his chest. As I lurched out of the bed, I noticed that a man was sitting on a nearby stool, arms folded, smiling over at me with an infuriating insouciance. It was Persiflage. "Oh, law," he said, pulling a face. "Got ourselves into a bit of a pickle this time, eh, old fruit?" I didn't move, but glanced quickly around the grim, bare room. "Favourite haunt of yours, by all accounts. We got a tip-off from the owner. You and the stiff came in here some time ago. High as kites, by his account." He's lying. "Checked into your usual room. Started getting up to whatever it is you chaps get up to," continued Flage hatefully. "Lover's tiff ensues, and, well, my pa always said men like you shot themselves. Turns out you shoot each other." "Look here," I said. "We can sort all this out. Would you mind awfully if we get out of here and leave the domestics to clear things up?" Flage shook his head. "No can do, old boy." The door to the squalid room suddenly flew open and a skinny man in the uniform of a police captain emerged. "I suggest we make a move, sir," he said. I was just making the same suggestion, I said, looking about for my clothes. Move where?
To the station house, sir, where you'll be charged with murder.
As long-term readers may recall, I've been in at more kills than the average Scotland Yarder has had bully beef, the victim usually having been knocked off by yours truly. And always, barring the odd assignment well away from civilised society, things have been hushed up nicely by the Secret Service, or the Royal Academy, as I know them. This time, now dressed and sitting in the police car, I knew I was in real trouble. Percy Flage slipped onto the seat next to me, his long blonde fringe bouncing into his eyes, a delighted smile on his lips. Both doors of the motor remained open, and bitter night air bled over us from the snow-white street. The police captain, inevitably Irish, was squawking orders to his subordinates, who were pushing back the eager crowd of ghouls that had appeared around the entrance to the flop house.
"Look here, Flage," I hissed. "This is insane. What the hell are you up to?"
I flashed a look through the back of the motor. The captain would return any moment. I didn't have long.
"Come on, man, this isn't how we do things. We look out for each other in the RA. There's a system. Why haven't you called the domestics or Reynolds?"
"I'm merely helping the police arrest the guilty party," said Flage.
"There's more to this. You know there is. I've been, what do they say here, framed up."
A thought suddenly struck me. Hubbard the Cupboard had said the same thing, that he'd been the victim of a set-up. I decided to risk showing my meagre hand.
"Listen," I whispered urgently, "I've got what you're looking for."
"What?"
"That lamb, or whatever the hell it is. I found it on Hubbard's body."
"You found a lamb on Hubbard's body? Taking it home for Sunday lunch, was he?" "Nice try, old thing."
"Fred, I searched him thoroughly. No livestock to be seen."
"You weren't told, were you?"
I persisted. "You weren't told exactly what you were looking for."
Flage looked momentarily nonplussed. "My orders were to bring back everything he had on him."
"You missed his top pocket, old boy," I mocked. "A small square of silk like a handkerchief. I know it's important."
"You're running away with yourself, old sport," said Flage smoothly. I looked wildly about, anticipating with dread the approach of the police captain and the disappearance of all my long-held privileges.
"Look," I said at last, "I'll tell you where it is. Then you can claim all the credit. Just get me out of this hell."
Flage glanced over his shoulder. The captain was still talking, his flashlight bobbing in the darkness. "All right," he said. "I can't promise anything, but tell me, quickly." He leant forward. I moved like a panther, jerking back my neck and then ramming my forehead into his nose. There was an awful crack, and I felt warm blood jet onto my face. Letting him slide sideways onto the sweaty upholstery, I melted out of the motor and onto the road, flattening myself against the freezing tarmacadam and risking a look under the vehicle. I could see the captain's steel-toed boots crunching their way towards me. Scuttling like a cripple, I moved across the roadway and within seconds made the safety of a pitch-dark alley. When I emerged at the other end, I hailed a yellow cab and ordered him to take me to Pier 39 down by the river, pulling a couple of greenbacks from my money belt to show I was in earnest. Then I sank back, utterly spent, and cast an anxious glance through the rear window. All seemed well. The old tub Stookie lay at her berth at the pier just as Sal Volatile had told me. Black water lapped at the rusted plates of her creaking hull, and she looked comprehensively unfit for an Atlantic crossing. I took Volatile's envelope from my pocket and assessed the situation. The dead man's exit strategy was completely open to me and was, indeed, currently my only option. What I wanted very much to avoid, though, was falling into a trap. Did those intent on framing me know about Volatile's plan? To substitute me on board the Stookie? Had I come all this way only to find Flage's men waiting for me in the rusting old ship? But the tub seemed to be under no observation, so, taking a deep breath, I strode swiftly up the rope-banistered gangway and onto the deck. The pounding of the engines set my already strained nerves on edge. A woolly-headed sailor spat tobacco juice at my feet and eyed me keenly. "Volatile," I muttered, handing over my documents.
"Or you know,"
he said, smiling in a cheeky fashion.
"We shall have to watch you then, eh?"
The sudden sound of home was as comforting as being wrapped in a Union flag. A slim shape in a white sweater and woolen cap flashed past us. A cabin boy, I supposed. And the sailor caught his arm.
"Here, all you are. You take care of Mr. Volatile here."
The sailor gave me another queer look, tapped his tobacco-yellow fingers to his cap, and vanished into the gloom, leaving the boy to show me to my cabin. It was a tiny, airless room, very close to the engines, judging by the constant thrum-thrum that set the brass ring of the porthole rattling. A simple bunk with a grey army blanket slung over it comprised the only furniture. Kneeling on the bunk, I peered through the porthole. Outside, the sea stretched like a black sheet towards Manhattan Island, the ship's ancient propeller churning the icy water at her stern a startling white as the engines ticked over. I glanced at my wristwatch. If we could only get going soon, if Volatile's escape route really hadn't been discovered, I might just be in with a chance. Poor old Lucifer has always been a rotten sailor, and waking in a fog of engine fumes, I greeted the new day with a dry heave, swung my legs off the bunk and sat up, coughing like a consumptive. I needed some fresh air, sharpish. I made my way across to the door and stumbled into the corridor beyond. As the Stookie plunged through the sea, I swayed towards the stairwell, only to walk face first into the massive aproned chest of what could only be the ship's cook. Built like the proverbial brick garderobe, this mulatto's ears were bright with silver rings, and one hand, in appropriately piratical fashion, was replaced by what looked like a tin opener. "So sorry," I bleated, just on my way to the deck." Sweat rolled in great glistening beads over his brick-like brow. He made no move to stand aside. Not feeling too bright," I managed, putting on my best silly-ass voice again in order to diffuse any potentially violent urges he might have. "So if you just let me pass?" A strange, guttural croak was his only answer. He glared down at me in an openly challenging fashion and held the sharp end of his harpoon close to my perspiring face. "Bullfrog!" The cry was as unexpected as it was welcome. The cabin boy from the previous night came running down the pitching corridor. In the queasy light, I could still make out little of his face, but I grew suddenly alert at the very noticeable protuberances in the rough fabric of his sweater, the very noticeable and breast-shaped protuberances. "I am Aggie," said the cabin boy with great gravity. "Do not mind Bullfrog. He is harmless. Welcome to the Stookie." She was duskily skinned, petite and devilishly exotic, her coal-black hair cut into a manageable crop under the cap. Her eyes were like polished jet, and there was the light of another race in their depths. She set up a rather pleasant little fluttering in my churning innards. "Isn't it meant to be unlucky?" I ventured. "Sir? Girls on ships. They do not think of me as a girl," she said, again with a kind of uncalled-for seriousness. "So I do not either." She stared at me with what looked very much like concern. "You are sick. You must get air. Come." Up on deck the day was dark and oppressive, the sea like a greasy grey blanket, and I found, much to my distress, that I felt no better. The waves battering at the creaking ship's plates were deafening. A stout fellow with a liverish countenance had swung into our line of sight. I felt the girl stiffen as he strode with perfect composure over the soaked planks. "It is the captain," she hissed in my ear. Captain Corpus's face was like a battered sail, strung tight across his bones as though against a force 10 gale. And just as the sailmaker might have patched and worried at the old canvas, so Corpus's flesh was uneven and terribly scarred. Jaundiced eyes popped out from sweaty, shadowed flesh. He glanced at me for only the briefest moment, and was about to resume his patrol of the deck when he suddenly swung back round.
"This is our passenger, is it, Aggie?"
"Yes, sir." Sal Volatile," I croaked, holding out a trembling hand that the captain declined to shake.
"And how are you finding us aboard the Stookie, Mr. Volatile?"
"Well," I said airily, "I've only just become acquainted with your friend here, though we did run into a charming one-armed fellow with a harpoon for a hand." Corpus's disastrous face twisted into a semblance of a grin.
"Oh, old Bullfrog's bark is worse than his bite. But then, since I cut his tongue out, he don't have much of a bark." I prize loyalty above all things, sir. Bullfrog got himself soused one night in Frisco and fell to telling tales about me. He won't never tell those tales again."
By the next day, after some food and a modicum of hot water, I was feeling a little better, and Aggie and I had become sufficiently pally for her to supply me with some togs a touch more appropriate for the crossing than my three-piece tweeds. I'd also learned that the Stookie was heading for Norfolk, swinging round the south coast of England and putting in at one or other of the tiny harbours that pepper that haunted coastline. The thought of home, however straitened by circumstances, was like a balm. Of course, Flage would ensure I was a wanted man, but I felt that the reassurance of British soil would do me the power of good. But what exactly was I to do when I got there? Continue with my mission to investigate Olympus Mons? Plead my case with the frankly unsympathetic head of the Royal Academy, Joshua Reynolds? Or piece together whatever strange clues linked the lamb, the silken relic, and the late Sal Volatile's reference to the convent of St. Bede? My thoughts were interrupted by a light knock at my cabin door. "Mr. Volatile?" It was Aggie. "I beg your pardon, sir," she said with her accustomed gravitas, "but the captain asked if you would be so good as to join him for a nightcap." "Eh?" Aggie nodded. "You are privileged, Mr. Volatile. Captain Corpusty does not usually find time for such pleasantries." That was what worried me. The captain's cabin was a riot of disorder. Charts and books lay everywhere, drawings and photographs had been tacked to the wooden walls, and there were grotesquely carved African masks and a guitar made from alligator hide slung lazily from the ceiling. Captain Corpusty was of a piece with his room. He looked up from his contemplation of a book, and the lamplight flashed in his yellowish eyes.
Yes, Mr. Volatile."
I shook his hand. "At your service, Captain."
No. It is I who should be at yours, sir. I am heartily sorry not to have properly extended my hospitality earlier in the voyage, but I'm a busy man, as you can see."
He gestured about at the disarray and gave a helpless shrug.
"Drink?"
I accepted gratefully and relished the taste, though the captain knocked back his own measure of brandy in one go. I cradled the chipped custard glass and smiled warmly at him. "I am very grateful for your expert seamanship, sir," I began. "I know the Atlantic can be treacherous."
"Now then," he cut across me abruptly, "let's not waste time. Mr. Box."
I felt suddenly cold as though I'd been standing on the prow of the rusty old vessel and Atlantic spray had covered me head to foot. "Ah," I said at last. Corpusty rubbed at his chin, and it made a sound like sandpaper.
"Fact is, there's all hell broken loose. The Yanks are after you, and have put out a description over the wireless. There's a mighty big reward, and all I have to do is wire them, and the British coppers will be ready with a nice welcoming party when we pitch up in Norfolk."
I looked levelly at him. "So, why haven't you?" He gestured around the squalid cabin, and for the first time I looked in some detail at the pictures that had been tacked to the walls. To my utter astonishment, I now saw that they were, to a man, photographic representations of old masters. Here was Velasquez sharing a warped beam with a Venetian Madonna. An unfinished Romney overlapped the capacious bosom of a flabby Rubens, and, dotted between them, sergeants, whistlers, and me. I recognised in quick succession the portrait I'd done of Lloyd George that the House of Commons had commissioned then refused to hang, and an earlier picture of a lovely girl with cornflowers in her hair, which had first brought me to the attention of the world. I blinked in absolute astonishment. Good God, you're a fan! I have known in my time many species of praise. Captain Corpusty's effulgent response to my presence, however, counted amongst the best.
"I don't care what you've done or not done, sir," he announced. "Far as I'm concerned, you're a genius of the first water, and that's," emphasised with slap on corduroy knee, "that." "I don't suppose," he said, screwing up one eye as he lit a cigar from the candle, "you would ever consent to making a picture of me?"
The old fellow asked it as shyly as a schoolgirl. Eager to please, I pooh-poohed my talents once more, made a show of resistance, but then grudgingly consented. A portrait in oils was completely out of the question, given the incessant pitch and roll of the Stookie, but I would just about be able to manage a creditable pencil sketch. Mon Capitaine said little during these sittings over the next few days, but simply sat and smoked, occasionally outlining his plans for my disembarkation, which consisted of plonking me in a rowing boat just off the coast while the Stookie herself steamed onwards to Cromer. According to the wireless, all the main ports were being watched, but Corpusty was confident the route he'd dreamt up would put me out of harm's way. As we churned through the leaden Atlantic towards England, I actually found a measure of peace in my scribblings. Corpusty's ravaged countenance, with its heavy lids and ragged, gin-blossomed nostrils, provided real inspiration. Of one thing I was extremely conscious, though. The Stookie was possessed of a most peculiar atmosphere that hung about it like a noxious cloud. It wasn't just the hissing and chuffing of the ancient engines, nor yet the stifling fug of the airless passageways. There was about the ship a sort of dread, drear gloom, a feeling that something malign lay at its very heart, like the shuttered door to a secret room in some Gothic romance. During an afternoon sitting for Corpusty's portrait, I ventured to inquire how he had managed to come by such a lovely creature as Aggie for a crew member. He pulled at his pipe and gave a throaty chuckle.
"Wondered when you get round to that. Quite the peach, ain't she?"
"Indian?" I asked, coyly, rubbing at the paper with my lead-darkened fingers.
"Ah, with a dash of Swiss, so I'm told."
How charmingly exotic. Corpusty's addled eyes twinkled naughtily.
"You fancied a bit of a Swiss roll, eh, Mr. Box?"
I laughed lightly. "What can you mean, Captain?" Corpusty settled himself more comfortably into his chair.
"Can't say as I blame you, but you'll get nowhere. Aggie Day's as pure as the driven, on account of her upbringing."
"Oh, yes."
"Yeah, nuns," he said,
pointedly, coughing up a ball of phlegm and spitting it against the cabin wall. My ears pricked so far they practically grazed the tobacco-glazed ceiling. Nuns? I watched the phlegm roll over the Madonna of the Rocks and Whistler's Mother before disappearing behind a cracked lampshade. This was in Switzerland, yes? Corpusty shook his head, jabbing his pipe in my direction as though scoring a point.
"No, you'll never believe it, but she's local to Norfolk. Settled in my neck of the woods when she weren't no more than a mother." "A young girl," he translated.
I affected nonchalance, concentrating on the drawing for a full minute before asking, "In a convent, you mean?" Corpusty nodded.
"Funny old place. Out on a causeway."
My heart thumped in my chest. St. Bede's? Corpusty frowned.
Dunno. Leastways don't ring no bells. Though, if it's a convent, I suppose it does. Ring bells, that is. St. Bede's. Suppose it could be. Why? You heard of it?
Read about it in some gazetteer or other, I said with a dismissive shrug. So how did Aggie get from being lodged at the convent to sitting below decks on the Stookie darning your socks? Ran away to sea, did she?
Not quite, he said at last. I was approached one day on the quay. The Mother Superior it was, and
he clapped his pipe into his mouth.
Well, that's another story.
Feigning indifference, I yawned and stretched. I'm done for now, Captain. Might snatch a nap before dinner. I had retreated to my cabin, somewhat fagged out, when Aggie's familiar light knock sounded at the door. Come! Ribbons of fog drifted inside with the girl, creeping around the jam like the tentacles of a spectral sea beast. A bad fog is coming up, Mr. Volatile, she said, shaking her head. Well, I said cheerily, don't fret. She looked at me with her huge, tragic eyes, and I realized that I simply didn't want to say goodbye to this fascinating creature. Look, I said gently, you've been awfully good to me these last days. Before we part forever, isn't there something I can do to say thanks? Her eyes bored into mine. Then suddenly she bounded onto the bunk, knocked me flat on my back, and kissed me with somewhat startling fervour. I hardly had time to respond when she pulled away, licking her lips thoughtfully and frowning. So, this is how it is to kiss a man. I think it is disappointing. She began to move away, but I grabbed her arm to pull her back. Hang on, I entreated. You caught me off guard, my dear. It's really much nicer if we both have a go. So saying, I let her crumple into my embrace and planted a long, lingering smacker on her dark lips. She relaxed a little, then stretched out like a cat. So, Aggie Day, I murmured. Short for Agatha, is it? The girl said nothing, but languorously closed and reopened her eyes. I decided to press my advantage. The captain tells me you were raised in a convent. She sat up with an angry hiss. He had no right to tell you that. No right at all. Hey, I soothed, slipping an arm round her waist. She resisted and wriggled towards the edge of the bed, trying to plant both feet on the cabin floor. It's all right, Aggie, I cried. This isn't an interrogation. I'm just interested, that's all. She turned her flushed face towards me, her lip turned down petulantly. They did not raise me, she said proudly, sinking back against the wall, arms folded. They imprisoned me. They told me I was special. So special they kept me locked up. This was all terribly mysterious. Sal Volatile knew of the convent of St. Bede. Indeed, it was the only place he said he'd feel safe. But why? And was this beautiful girl somehow caught up in it all? I won't burden you with the details of that night, of how we thrashed about in the none-too-clean sheets, plunging towards ecstasy till almost dawn, of my lean and lithe body conjoining with hers, locked in a fevered embrace that for a few sweet stolen hours banished all thoughts of sal volatile, persiflage, nuns, lambs, and mysterious cabalistic handkerchiefs. To cut a long story short, it was shaping up to be a dashed good tumble when something rather uncommon occurred. All at once, the air in the cabin began to thicken. A strange, bluey haze like wood smoke began to bleed through it, hanging in trailing threads, one layer overlapping another, like a formation of storm clouds. I glanced down at Aggie, but her eyes were still tightly shut in pleasure. Then, deep, deep within the smoke, there was a noiseless detonation, as though I was looking down the twin barrels of a shotgun, and 2 points of red light, glowing hellishly like coals, blossomed into life. I knew even before the smoke that surrounded them began to take on the vague, ectoplasmic structure of some nightmarish face that these ghastly glowing embers were eyes. I was seized by a sudden blank terror, rolled off Aggie and curled up into a ball. I could feel the girl's hand shaking me by the shoulders, but still there was no sound. I glanced fearfully over her shoulder, and the long, goatish face broke into a filthy, heathen grin. Then I screamed. When at last I came to, there was no sign of Aggie. I own I was in a total funk, trembling all over and covered in a sheen of cold sweat. What the hell had I seen? Or indeed, what from hell had I seen? That goatish face could only have been some fevered hallucination. Perhaps the noxious fumes from the old ship's engines had finally taken their toll. I needed some air, and I slipped out of my stuffy cabin, only to encounter the bulky figure of Captain Corpusty.
"Trouble sleeping?"
he said, cocking his head to one side. "Afraid so," I extemporized. "Martyr to insomnia, alas. Do you mind if we finish your portrait?" The old bruiser happily consented to this evening shift, and we repaired to his cluttered cabin. We sat in silence as I laboured away, my mind racing like a mad thing. At last I laid down my pencils. The captain craned over my shoulder and nodded appreciatively.
"Marvellous," he cried. "Marvellous, Mr. Box. Ruddy triumph. I never dreamt I'd see this day. But there's a little something you've neglected."
I frowned, looking the portrait over. I don't think so." Corpusty chuckled.
"Why, your signature, sir. Just scribble it at the bottom there."
"I thought you a student of my work, Captain," I said lightly. "Don't you know I never sign?" He laughed and rubbed at his chin.
Of course. I just wondered, perhaps this one time as a special favour."
"It would be very odd to make an exception even for you, Captain." Corpusty nodded, grunted, and gestured helplessly with both hands.
"But how else is it to be?"
he began. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he clapped one hand on my shoulder.
"Forgive the hasty words of a mere amateur, Mr. Box, for genius is visible in every line, every battered old contour you've rendered of this old mug of mine, and I shall treasure it, sir, treasure it as long as I live. These past few days have been a joy to me. Now, let's see about getting you home and safe."
We were approaching the Norfolk coast, and Corpusty gave orders for the rowing boat to be prepared for launch just before dawn. We shook hands, and I left him sizing up the sketch, pride lighting up his ravaged features. Back in my cabin, I prepared for disembarkation. Firstly, I made sure the precious silk relic was safely stowed within my money belt. Then I turned my attention to Percy Flarge's stolen automatic. I was just wrapping it in oilskin when I sensed a presence on the other side of my cabin door. Throwing it open, I revealed Aggie crouched low, her eye level with the keyhole. She turned at once on her heel, but I dashed forward and jerked her back. "Now you wish to touch me," she cried. "Before I disgust you so much that you scream at me in horror." No, I insisted. "What happened before? It was nothing to do with you. You're divine, my dear, really you are, the cat's pyjamas. But something dashed odd happened. I saw something in the air above us, a sort of face." Aggie stiffened in my arms. "Face?" Sounds like utter rot, I know, but it was like some demon had appeared. Scared the life out of me. Aggie's smooth brown cheeks had drained of colour. "You have seen it too?" "You mean—" "Yes," cried the girl. perhaps 3 or 4 times since I came to live aboard the Stookie. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I began to feel—" She shook her head dismissively. No, I urged, go on. "I felt that it was watching over me, like a guardian." She turned her fathomless eyes towards me, and then, like a child needing reassurance, draped her arms round my neck as we slid back onto the bed. Though my first instinct was to take advantage, like the good Christian I'm not, I let the girl fall asleep with her head on my chest. With nothing to do until my dawn departure, I attempted to fall into the arms of Morpheus myself. But there was something that the captain had said, and it kept jabbing at my thoughts like a fat blue bottle banging against a window pane. That little exchange of ours after I'd completed his drawing. What had he muttered when I'd refused to sign the damn thing?
"But how else is it to be?"
To be what? To be identified? I knew all at once with terrible certainty that I was about to be betrayed. Looking down at my wristwatch, I saw that it was 20 minutes to 4. I climbed from the bunk and shook Aggie awake.
"Change of plan," I hissed. "Corpus is trying to double-cross me. I'm off."
"Double-cross you? But why?" "Long story, my pet," I said with a smile. "You coming?" "What? Are you coming with me?" I said, crossing to the cabin door and swinging it open. Aggie violently shook her head. "No, I cannot do that."
"Oh, why ever not, for God's sake? What is there for you here?"
"The Stookie is my life. I owe everything to the captain." "The same captain who's about to give me up for filthy lucre?" She looked pained and confused. "These people are my comrades, my world." I sighed.
"Listen, I need to tell you something. My name's not Volatile. It's Box. Lucifer Box. I'm on the run from America because someone's accused me of murder. Your precious Corpusty is probably even now arranging for the police to meet this ship and take me away. I'm completely innocent. Well, not completely. There'll come a reckoning outside the pearly gates, I shouldn't wonder. But if you like me and you want to help, I'd be most awfully grateful. Are you game?" Aggie suddenly flashed me a winning smile.
"Yes," she said. "I shall come." Up on deck, we climbed silently over the rails into the swaying dinghy, slipped from the capstan in seconds, and began to row away from the Stookie for dear life. The old ship gradually vanished into the fog as we struggled towards the mainland. "There is a promontory, a kind of spur, hereabouts," whispered Aggie. "That is what we are heading for. But the fog—" Suddenly, a massive searchlight crackled into life and swung in our direction, throwing out a snow-white beam that bobbed and shifted over the surface of the sea. A voice barked out, muffled by both fog and megaphone, and it was startling in that oppressive murk.
"This is the police! Prepare to be boarded!"
Not a moment too soon, the boat bumped against sand and I fell back, the oars skewing crazily and almost catching Aggie on the side of her head. She somersaulted over the side, but the water came only to her waist. "We've done it!" she cried. "Quick! Ashore!" I stumbled to my feet, then immediately ducked down as a bullet sang off the boat, sending splinters into the air in a little cloud. They were shooting at us. By James, was this England? I dragged myself onto the shingle, weary to the very bone. Aggie followed suit and stood up, just as the damned searchlight swung round and lit her up bright as day. Another shot rang out. Aggie looked briefly astonished, then fell back into my arms. From somewhere, as though in a dream, I heard more barked commands from the police launch, but paid them no heed. I yanked the coat from Aggie's back. The sweater beneath was darkening with blood. She'd only been struck in the shoulder, I was hugely relieved to see, but it was clear she could go no further. "Go, you must go," she sighed, shakily batting my arm. "We shall meet again soon." She was right, of course. Well, chivalry's all well and good, but when a chap's liberty is at stake... I laid her gently on the cold sand. Taking to my heels, I didn't look back as I hared across the beach, my bare feet sending up sprays of shingle. It was devilishly hard going. Even when the shingle gave way to marshland, For every stretch of firm, reed-covered ground, there was another of swampy morass. But suddenly I saw salvation. Lying abandoned and almost completely covered in the long grass was the upturned wreck of a fishing boat. I pulled myself through a ragged hole in the disintegrating planks and into fusty but wonderful darkness, where, now utterly exhausted, I very soon nodded off. I snapped suddenly awake at the dreaded sound of baying hounds. With renewed desperation, I felt in my pocket for matches, hoping against hope that they were sufficiently dry to be of use. Then I stiffened, as, below the noise of the pursuing dogs, I became aware of another sound, close to, a sort of shuffling. At once I tried the matches. Once, twice, 3 times I rasped at the sandpaper without result, until suddenly the little stalk flared into sulphurous life. The place was alive, was boiling with rats. Scrambling backwards on my rear, I made for the open air just as the mass of rodents exploded outwards and I was overtaken by a torrent of stinking fur. But all at once, as though obeying some silent command, the creatures streamed away into the marshes like a trickle of oil. And then, as before, a strange quiet descended, and the clear night air began to blur and change. I froze in absolute terror as the dreadful goatish face that I'd seen earlier in my cabin began to form once more, pitiless eyes shining redder and more lurid than those of the slavering rats. A sense of utter despair took hold of me, and I sank to my knees on the spongy ground. Then, as suddenly as if I'd been slapped across the face, the spell was broken. I cried out in horror, shocked by the sound of my own voice, but of the apparition there was no sign. Instead, I became fully aware of the rumbling bark of the police dogs. Struggling to see into the middle distance, I could make out the bent shapes of men being dragged through the marshland by their excited hounds. They were moving in completely the wrong direction. I knew at once what had happened. The dogs were in full pursuit of the filthy pack of rats, in which case the hellish ghoul I had seen had come to my rescue. I thought back to what Aggie had said, that the thing she'd seen was her guardian. I got to my feet and scarpered, keeping out of sight of the men and their dogs, now little more than vague silhouettes on the horizon. Some way ahead, an imposing Gothic building reared up, utterly black against the starlight, save for a single electric light burning in a ground-floor window. There was about it the familiar musty smell of a church building, a mixture of damp foxed books, incense, and rotten nosh. The Convent of St. Bede's. Obviously in no position to go knocking on the front door, posing as an itinerant archbishop, I reasoned my best plan was to get a look at what was going on behind that lighted window. I don't know what I expected to see. A studious nun, looking like the penitent Magdalene, perhaps, crouched over a sputtering candle and mumbling a catechism. What I certainly didn't expect to see was my sister Pandora, smoking a cigarillo and pointing a gun at what was evidently the Mother Superior. The aged nun, her huge white wimple still perfectly ordered like the bowl of an orchid, sat bound to a rickety chair, a desk lamp blazing in her face. Suddenly the door opened and Olympus Mons strode into the room, his face buried in some sort of file. He gave the nun a warm smile, as though he were a genial solicitor about to tell her she'd come into money, and then fixed Pandora with his penetrating stare. "Anything?" he said sharply. My sister shook her head. "Still refuses to admit there's any such thing." "You're not being very bright," he said directly to the Mother Superior in his light Yankee accent. "We happen to know that the lamb was bred here, was sent out from here. It's a secret your order has been guarding for years." "Nonsense!" Mons's face twisted with rage, and his hands flew to the nun's neck. She managed one rasp of shock as his fingers sank into the wrinkled flesh. Then only a horrid squawking was audible as she struggled for air.
"You silly little man," she croaked. "You really think your brutal tactics will succeed?"
Suddenly I felt a sharp pain in the ribs and swung round from the window to find a broken-nosed, amber-shirt thug jabbing his Tommy gun at me.
"Lucifer!"
gasped Pandora as I was marched into the room, hands above my head. "I say, sis," I said cheerily, "I'm not up on the old-time religion and all that, but isn't nun torturing a little beyond the pale?" Pandora groaned, as though we were children again, and I kicked over her snowman.
"Olympus, I'm so sorry. I don't know what he's doing here."
Mons broke into a slightly hysterical laugh. "But I do, my dear, I do. You see, my sources have been telling me some interesting things about your dear brother. He isn't quite the gentleman he appears."
"Oh, I've always known that,"
said Pandora with a sour look. Mons was relishing every moment. "Whilst presenting the world with the image of a successful artist, well, a once successful artist, your sibling has been, for many years, an employee of His Majesty's government."
A civil servant?"
said Pandora thickly. Mons shook his head. "A most uncivil one, I fear. He's an assassin, aren't you, Mr. Box?" The Mother Superior was sobbing now, and I moved toward her, only to find the Tommy gun rammed sharply into my side. Mons scowled at the old woman. "Shut up!" he spat. I plunged my hands into the pockets of my moleskin trousers. "Your boyfriend does me a disservice, Pan. I do the lot. Sleuthing, daring-do. The assassinating's just part of it." Mons clapped his hands together. "Oh, so your other profession is as workmanlike as your painting. How neat." "Well, now you're just being nasty," I said. Still the Mother Superior sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Mons's eyes grew large again, glistening with fury. "I'm afraid I can't help myself," he said between gritted teeth. "Pandora here will testify to it. I'm a very nasty fellow." So saying, he produced a pistol from his jacket and fired. The Mother Superior fell from her chair with a sharp cry of surprise. Her robe suddenly splashed with scarlet. "That was stupid," I shrugged. "Now, how are you going to find out what you want to know?" Mons watched the white smoke curling from the end of his pistol, fascinated. "I have my methods," he muttered at last. A cracked smile lit up his features, his dog tooth protruding like a glittering fang. "Yes, after all, why not? I have access to these powers. Why not use them?" He gestured impatiently to his armed thug and pointed at the corpse of the Mother Superior. "Pick her up." The amber-shirt obliged, dragging the dead woman from the flagged floor and dropping her back onto the chair with brutal casualness. Mons stood for a moment, his face raised to the ceiling, swaying slightly on his feet, like a dancer picking up a rhythm. He began to mumble in a low, guttural tone. Then in one quick movement he jerked his body round, leant directly over the dead Mother Superior and pressed his fingers to her temples. The intonation bubbling in his throat grew even deeper and more sonorous. A kind of miasma began to form on the stone floor of the chamber, as though mist were creeping in from the grey sea beyond, and I had the weird sensation that time had somehow stopped. Then the air cleared to reveal the impossible sight of the dead Mother Superior sitting bolt upright, her face tipped up as if staring at the ceiling, her eyes perfectly white and opaque. And then she spoke. "Who has summoned me?" The voice was dreadful, low, cracked, flat. Mons strutted before the woman, his features contorted with hellish triumph. "I, Olympus Mons, in the name of Azrael, Baralamensis, and the chief princes of the throne of Apologia, I command you to answer me. Where is the lamb?" The nun's head fell back, a terrible, gargling moan erupting from her throat, and she spoke for a moment in her old, gentle tones.
"I cannot tell. I must not tell."
Suddenly, as though all resistance had been overcome, the woman went limp in his grip, and a torrent of words began to tumble from her mouth. Mons lowered his head so as to hear. "Bread here, bread here, but sent far away, far away. She travels by sea, but now she is landlocked again. They sought to hide her from the likes of you. She is dangerous, a gentle, gentle girl, but so dangerous to the world, to us all. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccate mundi, miseri nobis, the Lamb of God." I felt cold all over. An image of my beautiful cabin girl suddenly swam into my mind. Aggie. Not short for Agatha, but Agnes. Agnus Dei. The Lamb of God. I stood there in wretched impotence, frozen by the terrible knowledge I possessed. All the attention I'd squandered on that ruddy handkerchief, thinking that was the elusive lamb, and it was sweet Aggie they'd been after the whole time. What part could she possibly play in Mons's nefarious schemes? My mind raced as the garrulous corpse cheerfully spilled the beans. "Where is she now?" demanded Mons. "Where?" "Where the blue lamp glows and the red church looms, and only a friend stands watch over her." "Where is she?" screamed Mons. "Ask him who is fallen," smiled the dead Mother Superior. For one last time her face assumed a look of serenity, then distorted again as though in torment. "God forgive me!" she shrieked, then slumped to the floor. The séance was over. "Him who is fallen," murmured Pandora. "Him who is fallen, him who is fallen." Mons seemed equally stumped. He cracked his knuckles and frowned. I was finding this difficult to credit. Didn't Mons's mob know their Bible, particularly the bit about the battle between God and the most comely of his angels? "It's me!" I yelled, unable to bear their lack of erudition a moment more. "For heaven's sake, what did you do at school, Pandora?" Mons brightened up at once. "Of course, the fallen angel, Lucifer." He fixed me with his arc-light stare. "You know her, then? You know this woman, this Lamb of God? Then tell me where she is." I folded my arms. "Or what? Just what is this great plan of yours?" "Oh, it's nothing much, really. I merely wish to summon the devil himself and use his power to perpetuate my own." Mons stroked his waxed moustache. "There is an invocation, an ancient thing. It's called the Jerusalem Prayer, and it's mentioned in heathen writings and diabolistic tracts going back as far as you can imagine. It describes how, if a chosen one is sacrificed to Satan, he will be released from the supernatural bonds with which he is restrained. That sacrifice is a perfect victim, a woman with holy blood running through her veins, descended from an unbroken line of such anointed ones. It has taken me a long time, but finally I tracked her down to the convent of St. Bede." "Well, doesn't do you much good without this Jerusalem what's-it of yours, there," I said. Mons nodded excitedly and let out another of his childish giggles. I've spent several fortunes in the hunt, but I finally traced it to some filthy little fence back in the good old US of A. Hubbard the cupboard, of course. Pennies, as you can imagine, were now dropping all over the shop. But he got greedy, yes? I speculated. Removed part of the prayer in order to hold out for more money? Mons's face darkened. To find myself held to ransom by scum like that, after all those years of fruitless searching. I grunted unhappily. Mons must have used his acolyte, the odious Percy Flage, to rub the fellow out. But Flage hadn't found the square of silk, the handkerchief that obviously contained some vital missing part of the ritual, the part dealing with the sacrifice of the Lamb of God. My hand stole to my trouser pocket, where the wretched thing now nestled. Suddenly, the dead nun let out a dreadful groan. Whether it was the last residue of air in her leathery old lungs, or the vestiges of the demonic possession, I cannot tell, but it was all the distraction I needed. Swinging round, I socked the amber-shirt guard on the jaw and grabbed his Tommy gun. Then I pulled Mons to me, pressed the gun to his temple, and looked wildly about for an exit.
"Don't be an idiot, Lucifer," sneered Pandora. "You know you haven't a chance. Give up now, and we'll be merciful."
The quality of your mercy, dear sis, is somewhat strained, I fear. Now get that door open. I renewed my grip on Mons's throat and hauled him backwards through the doorway and out into the freezing night. It was good to breathe clean, fresh air after the horrible frost within. I glanced at the black water lapping close by, whipped up by the breeze. Suddenly, another amber-shirt came pelting towards us, and I loosed off a round from the Tommy gun. The poor fool crashed to the shingle, but Mons took advantage of the distraction to twist round and ram his head into my solar plexus. I crumpled backwards, dropping the gun, and then Mons was looming over me, outlined against the starlight. "You'll pay for this little display, my friend," he raged, spraying my face with his spittle. "You'll pay right now." Wait, I gasped. "Recognize this?" And I pulled the silk handkerchief from my pocket. Mons stepped back, reached into his suit, and flicked open a cigarette lighter. In the long, narrow yellow flame, I saw his pitiless eyes widen. "The missing piece," he croaked. "The Jerusalem prayer." With a cry, I grasped hold of his wrist and pulled it back so that the flame caught him on the cheek. He shrieked with pain and dropped the lighter. I lashed out desperately with my boot, kicked him in the gut, threw off my coat, rammed the silk into my trouser pocket, and without another thought, hurled myself into the icy water. I swam downwards with frantic energy, dimly aware of bullets sizzling through the dark water. Weighed down by my heavy clothes, it was a titanic struggle not to simply drown then and there, but I kicked and thrashed at the current, trying desperately to put some distance between myself and the shore. At last, lungs afire, I propelled myself upwards towards the air. I emerged, gasping for breath, still perilously close to my tormentors. Amidst the splashing came the sound of yelled orders, and a fresh spurt of bullets bit the water. Mons screamed at his men to cease firing. My gamble had paid off. He couldn't risk me dying and taking the fragment of his precious prayer to the bottom. With the unpredictable current, my body might never be found. I swam on into the night. I must have swum for miles. Eventually I emerged from the icy water and staggered back onto terra firma, my exhausted legs quaking like a newborn pup's as I crunched my way over the shingle. Up on the higher ground was parked a large and rather distressed old motor car, engine ticking over, the beams of its headlights piercing the dark like beacons. As I approached, the doors of the motor opened and two bulky silhouetted figures clambered out, rods over their shoulders. Midnight fishermen. As quietly as I could, I raced across the pebbles, crouched down behind their stately old motor, and reached out for the door handle. I slipped inside, conscious at once of the reek of fish and old leather, and felt about the dashboard, praying that the key had been left in. My fingers found the blessed little piece of metal, and I twisted it clockwise. The engine whirred, and, with a bucking, wheezing splutter, the ancient thing roared into life. I spanned the wheel, crunched the squealing gears, slammed my foot onto the pedal, and roared off. Olympus Mons, I knew, would waste little time in procuring transport and would be after me post-haste. But what to do with my head start? I could head for London, where I was at least assured of help from old friends, but the vital thing to me seemed to be the rescue of Agnes Day. The nun had spoken of a blue lamp and a red church. It seemed safe to assume the former referred to a police station, and that poor, wounded Aggie was being held locally, charged with aiding and abetting a wanted felon. I motored at high speed through half a dozen tiny outcrops of houses that hugged the coastline, scarcely passing a single other motor. Just when it looked as though I would never hit anything remotely like civilization, another steep dip brought me out into a larger conurbation, dominated by a big, ugly church and a rambling inn ablaze with electric light. In the glow from the windows, I could see that the church was clearly built of weathered red sandstone. I could hardly believe my luck. Slowing down as I drove down the main street, I craned round to look about and gave a grunt of satisfaction at the comforting sight of a blue lamp outside a large, modern-looking police station. So here was the red church and the blue lamp that the dead Mother Superior had described. I glanced at my wristwatch. It was a little after 6 a.m. I parked the car, mounted the steps to the station, and darted swiftly inside. At first, all was darkness, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shape of the main desk and a couple of chairs. A door to the side of the desk was ajar. As I'd hoped, barred cells lit only by starlight were visible beyond. If the Mother Superior, or whatever possessed her, had been speaking the truth, then poor Aggie was inside. And if my luck held, the foolish local bobbies had left her unguarded. "Aggie," I whispered. No reply. Probably sound asleep, poor thing. "Agnes!" There came the sound of stirring, the creak of a stool, perhaps, and the folding back of blankets. Then there was movement in the darkness and a flashlight in my eyes. I squinted and held up my hand before me. But it wasn't Aggie who spoke. It was a man's voice, oozing malice. "Oh, happy day. I knew you'd come." The newcomer held the torch under his chin. His nose was almost completely obscured by sticking plaster, and both his eyes were black and bruised from where I'd head-butted the cur. It was only the shock of blonde hair sticking out like damp straw from beneath the brim of his trilby that told me Percy Flage was back on the scent. Electric lights rattled into life around me, and I squinted at the unaccustomed brightness. Uniformed shapes darted from the corners of the room, and I found myself suddenly restrained. Flage looked at me with utter contempt. Next to him stood an excited-looking local bobby of almost unbearable youth, and the weasel-like form of Twice Daily, a particularly unpleasant domestic and factotum of Flage's. He held up a hand and gave me a cheery wave. I felt quite sick. "Look, Flage, I don't give a pin for myself," I announced heroically. "They'll tell me the girl's all right." "Formed a little attachment, have we? How sweet. Look behind you." I whirled round. We were standing before the cells, and curled up in the bunk that lay alongside the wall was Aggie, sound asleep. I moved towards the bars, but the policeman held me back. "She's fine," said Flage. "Flesh wound in the shoulder. But the charge of aiding and abetting a wanted felon might be more difficult to shrug off." The coppers pinioned my arms roughly behind my back, and the little domestic clapped on handcuffs that pinched pinkly at my wrist. The other end he clapped onto his own arm. "I believe," I said, "that I'm entitled to telephone my solicitor." "We'll arrange that whilst you're on the train to London," snapped Flage. I shook my head. "Oh, no. There's no telling what you chaps have got cooked up for me. I'd rather do it here, in front of this honest yeoman." I nodded towards the fresh-faced constable. "I am only asserting my rights, am I not, officer?" The boyish PC dialed the number I gave him and handed me the cold black receiver. "Box here," I said crisply. "Look here, old thing, I seem to have got myself in a bit of bother. Oh, read about it, have you? Yes, well, all a lot of nonsense, of course, but I'd be rather glad of your representation." Somewhere in Norfolk, I think." My solicitor's voice sounded as though it were coming from several fathoms beneath the ocean. "London train," I said in response to the solicitor's question. "Well, any minute now." I was conscious of my captors listening to every word. I flashed them a pleasant smile. "Righto. Thanks. Yes, thanks awfully. How's Ida?" "Oh, really?" Flage rolled his eyes and began to get to his feet. "Yes, well, I'd bring her, certainly. And try prunes. They always do the trick." The compartment was dark and stank like damp dogs. There were 6 seats, and Daly and I took up one pair, the short chain between the cuffs that bound us catching tight over the armrest. Flage and Aggie settled into the green upholstery opposite, the girl drifting immediately into unconsciousness. She was very pale, and there were dark, unhealthy rings under her eyes. Flage crossed his feet one over the other and opened a newspaper. "Well, isn't this nice?" I heaved a deep sigh. "Why are we taking the train, Flage?" "Speed is of the essence, old thing," he said, snapping the paper outwards so that it billowed like a sail. "I say, you're all over the Times. Would you care to see?" "No, thanks. Any chance of a cigarette?" He smiled nastily from beneath his bindings. "Well, perhaps later, if you're very good." All 4 of us lurched forward slightly as the train began to pull out from the station. Aggie stirred and groaned. Flage looked her up and down. "Quite a dish, old man," he said hatefully. "Dear me, I wish you'd make up your mind which way you incline. A chap struggles to keep up." "Story of your life, Percy," I retorted. He grunted mirthlessly. Putting my free hand to the window, I rubbed at the steamed-up glass, the condensation squeaking beneath my fingers. The terminus and freedom slipped away as we steamed out, melting into a blur of colour, then a monotonous succession of telegraph poles. I pretty soon fell into a reverie, rocking from side to side as the train crawled south. Aggie, looking very beautiful and vulnerable, curled into a tight ball on the fusty upholstery, a little pulse beating in her slender throat. I'd promised her a better life away from the Stookie, yet all I'd succeeded in doing was thrusting her into the hands of her enemies. Outside, the short winter day faded with miserable rapidity, and electric light suddenly sprang into life above our heads. "I don't suppose you'd care to chat," I said to Flage. My nemesis was invisible behind his paper. He seemed engrossed in the football scores. "What about?" he said at last. "About this trumped-up charge, of course," I cried, "and why you seem so keen to believe in it." Flage collapsed the paper onto his lap and began filling his pipe. Soon a haze of cherry-smelling tobacco smoke was hovering over us like ectoplasm. "I just do as I'm told, old boy," said Flage blandly, jamming the pipe into the corner of his mouth. "Something you should have considered doing a long time ago. It was inevitable you get tripped up." "I had nothing to do with Sal Volatile's death," I insisted. "That's not what the evidence says, old dear." I suddenly remembered the fragment of the Jerusalem prayer, and my hand flew to my trouser pocket. Twice Daly twisted in his seat to stop me, but Flage didn't flinch. "It's all right," he said mildly. "It isn't there." "What isn't?" I said. "Well, the relic, of course. Worth a king's ransom, so I'm told." "Ah," he snapped his fingers. "Got it. You were in league with that fellow Volatile. You both conspired to get the silk what's-it off that Hubbard chap and divide the spoils. He tried to double-cross you, so you shot him. It's a good job we searched you thoroughly, or would have missed the damn thing." "So where is it now?" I asked. Flage sucked on his pipe and let his gaze drift to the ceiling of the compartment. The tobacco smoke was shifting restlessly above the luggage rack like a repentant spirit. "Mr. Daly here has it nice and safe, until it can be returned to its rightful owner. Olympus Mons." said Flage. "You're quite fixated on that fellow. What on earth makes you think it belongs to him?" I had no chance to inquire further. There was a terrible, tortured screech of metal on metal, and I pitched forward, my face almost burying itself in Flage's lap. Daly fell forward, his knees thumping against the uncarpeted floor of the carriage, and he muttered an unmentionable oath. The screaming of the brakes continued for a full minute as the train ground to a shuddering halt. Aggie didn't even stir. The lights flickered, then died. Flage pushed me off him and leapt to his feet, cocking a pistol. "I don't like this. Wait here." I glanced over at poor Aggie, still curled up in her seat, then shrugged and smiled cheerily at my guard. "Well, Mr. Daly, it's just the three of us." "Shut up," he began, then his head snapped round at the unmistakable sound of gunshots from outside the train. I seized my chance. In the darkness I spotted the glow of Flage's discarded pipe. I grasped it by the bowl and lashed out towards Daly's face. My weapon met almost no resistance, and I would have assumed I'd missed had it not been for Daly's sharp, surprised cry. I'd driven the stem of the pipe right through his eye and into his brain. Nasty. There was no time to hang about. I scrabbled in the dead man's pockets for the key to the handcuffs, but trace of it there was none. Instead, I found the silken relic. Even in the dark, I could feel the familiar ragged edges, and I stuffed it into my trousers before grabbing Daly's gun and blasting through the cuffs. Reaching out towards Aggie, I felt for her face and slapped at her cheeks. "Aggie," I urged. "Aggie, my dear, wake up." There was no response. The girl had clearly been drugged. I scooped her up and threw her over my shoulder, then, knees almost buckling, jumped out onto the tracks. I lumbered as swiftly as possible alongside the carriages, expecting a bullet in my back at any moment. Suddenly I was clear of the train and crunching over the exposed tracks. A flashlight snapped into life, and I was momentarily dazzled.
"Mr. Boxer!"
Delilah! The massive, squarish form of my devoted servant loomed up at me, swaddled in greatcoat and balaclava. "Turn that ruddy thing off, Delilah," I commanded. "What kept you?"
"Oh, motor's just along here, sir," she said efficiently. "Sorry to take so long, but you didn't give much notice to get the obstruction set up."
We ran swiftly towards the waiting car, settled Aggie inside, and clambered gratefully aboard. "Let's go," I yelled. But Delilah merely peeled off the balaclava, revealing a blotchy, weathered face like Christmas turkey giblets left to linger until New Year. She sniffed miserably.
"Begging your pardon, sir, but there's another gentleman here what wants to see you."
"Gentleman? What gentleman?" I heard two delicate coughs, and a figure leant forward out of the shadows of the car's interior.
"So sorry, Mr. Box," said the figure, "but there's no time to explain."
He seemed to be holding something in his hand. Darting forward, he pressed it to my face. I was very much surprised to find it was chloroform. Awaking from fevered dreams of goatish pandemonia, I found myself looking out through a little squarish window, a bar of brilliant sunlight across my face. I was airborne, don't you know, and could see the fuselage of the monoplane glinting like tin. Far, far below, snow-capped mountains glittered in the rarefied atmosphere, looking for all the world like a three-dimensional map rolled out for my benefit.
"Switzerland,"
said a voice. I turned my head. Sitting behind me was a small man in a serge suit. He was as pale as his own hair, and, rising, he gave a couple of tiny coughs behind his gloved hand.
"It's good to see you again, Mr. Box. We have much to discuss, you and I."
So this was Delilah's mysterious gentleman, Professor Rice Muller of the Metropolitan Museum, the curious fellow who'd given me his expert opinion on the silk hanky back in New York. He sat down opposite me, a chrome-bordered, blonde wood table between us. "I'm sure we do," I rejoined. "Care to start with why you've kidnapped me?" The aspirin-white expert gave a helpless shrug.
Time was of the essence, friend. Once I'd contacted Delilah and came in on the plan to liberate you, it was essential we get on our way forthwith.
I protested. What the deuce is going on? Where's Aggie? Reismuller gestured towards a royal blue curtain that divided the cabin.
Through there, enjoying 2 boiled eggs, courtesy of your faithful Delilah. She'll join us presently.
All right, I said with an exhausted sigh. Explain. Reismuller gave a funny little laugh that dissolved into a double cough.
I'm afraid I haven't been fully frank with you, Mr. Box, or rather, my government has not.
Meaning? The little man balanced his Homburg on the table and moved it round in a clockwise direction, contemplating it like an indecisive shopper.
Well, let's just say that the Metropolitan Museum and the Royal Academy have more in common than you might think.
I frowned. You're not...
Agents of a secretive bent, yes, he giggled.
Then his watery gaze settled on me.
Things have changed so much since we last met. The Jerusalem prayer has been lost for so many centuries that many believe it to be mere myth. I never dreamed I'd get to touch it, the most powerful occult artifact in history.
The professor took off his owlish glasses and rubbed at heavily bagged eyes.
There's a legend, he began at last, leaning forward, old as mankind but long forgotten. In the time after the flood, Satan's power on earth grew so strong that God was forced to rejoin battle. The devil was eventually defeated, and God imprisoned him in a kind of living death, trapped like a fly in amber.
He cast a glance towards the window.
Such was Satan's malign power that not even this could keep evil from the world. But so long as the Dark One himself remains thus bound, mankind is safe from ultimate destruction.
And the Jerusalem prayer? I said. Reismuller shrugged.
It's the key to unlocking the enchantment that chains the devil. The prayer was separated into fragments and hidden around the world. That square of silk is one of the fragments. Luckily, that's all Mons had, and he doesn't even have that anymore. My orders are to take him, out of the picture, as it were, and return the relic to the U.S.
So why all the hoo-ha? Why not just take the relic off me? Reismuller looked hurt.
Take it off you? We're not thieves, Mr. Box. You and I are partners. Once we're safe, you can fully debrief me.
Where exactly are we heading, by the way?
One of the Met safe houses on the Franco-Swiss border. We'll hole up there and keep an eye on Mons's activities.
Is he in Switzerland?
Oh, yes. Our sources tell us he's returned to his Schloss within the last day or so.
Reismuller's mouth turned down.
We believe he thinks he's found the tomb of Satan beneath his castle, but the exact location is contained in your fragment, so he's digging in the dark, as it were.
I took out the silken object and smoothed it over the arm of my chair. I think I have a surprise for you too, Mr. Reismuller, I said, choosing my words with care for maximum dramatic impact. You see, it's not just a question of arresting a deluded fascist bully and hiding away this little rag in our communal attic. Olympus Mons has the rest of the prayer, every last fragment, and he intends to use it. Reismuller's milk-white face turned paler still.
What you've told me changes things somewhat, he said at last. I'm minded to follow the course of one of your illustrious predecessors, that hunchbacked fellow who gave the gunpowder plotters enough rope to hang themselves, or so they say. Why don't we let Mons's plans mature, then grab him red-handed? If he's taken in flagrante trying to summon the devil, then we'll get him and all his crazy followers at the same time. We can pump him for everything he's got on the Anglo-American fascist network, And with the world situation brewing up the way it is, that'll be pretty hot information. After that, we'll nail him with something commonplace. The IRS are trying a similar dodge with Capone. Tax evasion, would you believe?
I stepped off the plane with my arm hooked through Aggie's. Delilah followed, then the professor, accompanied by two well-built associates wearing pork pie hats. They were clearly some species of guard. We'd landed on a private airstrip, bordered on all sides by dense green forest, with snow-bright peaks bobbing above the tree line. "So Mons has taken over the local castle," I said at length.
"See for yourself,"
said Reismuller, producing a pair of brass binoculars and pointing towards the snowy peaks. Above the forest loomed a familiar mountain, its surface dotted all over with searchlight housings. It was, of course, identical to the image sewn into the silken fragment of the Jerusalem prayer.
"Suits his dreams of grandeur, I guess,"
said Reismuller, giving a short wave to the pilot, who was just a blur of goggles and flying coat behind the glass of the cockpit.
"The pilot will stay ready till we need him again. Now, if you and the young lady are okay, Mr. Box, it's only a short walk to the cottage."
The Met's safe house turned out to be a delightfully comfortable little place. Delilah soon got the stove blazing and began filling the tub upstairs with buckets of steaming water. There were plenty of togs in storage, and after a brief, heavenly soak, I changed into canvas trousers, soft-collared shirt and pullover. Immensely comforted, I settled down for further discussions with Reismuller. Aggie, meanwhile, prepared herself for the next bath. The professor steepled his fingers as he relaxed into his chair.
"So, Mons has the rest of the prayer," he mused. "How'd he come to lose the most important piece?"
Mustn't ever have had it, surely. Otherwise he'd know the location of the, devil's tomb and wouldn't be digging up half his estate. I looked at the fragment of silk that lay spread on the table between us. No, it seems a chap called Hubbard was trying to extort millions from Mons for that last piece. He must have known how much it was worth, but Hubbard reckoned without an agent called Flarge.
"Flarge?"
"Percy Flarge, a swine of the first order. He's the one out to frame me. Whether it's just him or the whole of the Royal Academy, I simply don't know. All that's clear is that I got the drop on the brute. Found the one thing they'd been searching for just tucked into Hubbard's breast pocket." Reismuller contemplated his nails and gave his double cough.
"But all this is academic, unless Mons has found the perfect victim."
"She's taking a tub upstairs right at this moment," I said rather smugly. At this, the little chap positively exploded in staccato coughing. I told him everything about Aggie's identity, how Sal Volatile had discovered her location and then attempted to prise himself away from Mons's clutches and frustrate his schemes. "Well," I said at last, "devil or no devil, I need Kip, if you'd excuse me." I slipped the relic into the pocket of my new trousers. Reismuller bobbed his head.
"Of course. I'll leave my boys on guard, so you've no need to worry. Get some shut-eye and I'll join you later. I need to speak to the Met as to how to proceed." We rose to our feet simultaneously and briefly banged into one another, the professor's glasses dislodging. He mumbled apologies and went out. I went upstairs and looked in on Aggie, apparently asleep and wrapped in a huge rough towel, one slender coffee-coloured arm stretched carelessly behind her head. Then, languorously, she opened one eye. For once, her curiously serious expression was mingled with something altogether more naughty. "Can I help you?" she said. "You most certainly can." Afterwards, I badly felt the need of a post-coital fag, but I seemed to have left my ciggies on board the little plane. "Just going to see what the prof's up to," I told the reclining Aggie as I took my leave. "Back in a jiff." I found a long leather flying coat hanging on the back of the door, slipped it on, and headed out of the cottage, straight into the path of one of the professor's horribly healthy, pork-pie-hatted friends. He seemed in no mood to let me pass. "Just going for a stroll," I said airily.
The po-faced fellow shook his head. "I don't think the professor would like that, sir." His accent was as regulation as his regulation American suit. "We have your welfare at heart." "My welfare? Look here, you're supposed to be our guards, not our jailers." Grudgingly he let me pass, but I felt his eyes bore deep into my back as I strode on across the snowy tarmac at him. It was much colder now, and I plunged my numbed hands deep into my trouser pockets. Then, in sudden panic, I realized the prayer was gone. Oh, law! By now I'd reached the plane. As Rice-Muller had promised, the pilot was sitting on a low wall awaiting our instruction. He held up a hand in greeting, then slid the same hand into his jacket and pulled out a pistol. I stopped dead. The pilot reached up and hauled off his goggles and flying helmet in one smooth movement, revealing a shock of blonde hair and a very bruised and broken nose. "Don't say a word," said Persiflage between gritted teeth. "Just come with me." I followed meekly, but my mind was afire. It was imperative I get away from Persiflage and retrieve the fragment of the Jerusalem prayer. Everything else, my life, Aggie's safety, was mere beer and skittles in comparison. I crossed without fuss towards the aeroplane, which was now shining like a toy in the last beams of the purple sun. The cabin door was open, and Flage prodded at my side until I clambered inside. "Neat trick, that," I murmured as I flopped down into my old seat, "substituting yourself for the pilot. How did you cotton on to us?" Flage seemed anxious, his usual smug smile replaced by a sort of blankness. "You're joking, aren't you?" he scoffed. "The Metropolitan Museum is wide open. We know about almost everything they do. Standing joke at the Royal Academy." He waved the gun about. "What we've certainly known for a long time is that chap Rice-Muller's as leaky as a sieve. Didn't take too much to penetrate his plans. I reckon the Met want the Jerusalem prayer for themselves." Something about Flage's tone disquieted me, and thoughts of immediate flight subsided. "There's something wrong, isn't there, Percy?" I said. "By now you should be thumping me and swearing 7 kinds of vengeance for all I've put you through." "I know I want to," he said. "Ever since I joined the Royal Academy, I've had your ruddy name and reputation rubbed in my face. I thought I'd never get one up on you." Flage put his foot up on the chair in front and chewed his lip. "Look here, Box. I was thrilled when I got the tip-off to come to that flea-bitten hotel and I found you in bed with the corpse. I was even more thrilled when the Academy told me that normal rules didn't apply. But one thing I'll never do. I'll never see you go down for something you didn't do. I may be a swine, but I'm not a traitor." With which remarkable statement, he took out a small and ancient-looking book and tapped out a folded piece of foolscap that lay within. I read it over, and then read it again. My skin grew clammy, and I felt sick to my stomach. "It was inside Daly's coat," said Flage. "Inside this book. I found it when you escaped from the train. Looks like the draft of a cryptogram. Makes things pretty clear, what?" That it did. "Planted the rag as requested," it ran. "Box took the bait. Took him down in the drugstore and interrogated volatile Lamb. Subject died during process. What should I do?" I looked up. Daly set up that little charade in the hotel so that I'd carry the can. Flage nodded. "There's more. A reply." He tossed over another cryptogram on thin yellow paper with Daly's patient decoding in pencil beneath. "Box will find the lamb for us," I read. "He's still the best we have. He must have the prayer. And Barnebjed shall rise." Clearly then, twice daily and not Flarge was in league with Olympus Mons. But one thing I still failed to understand. The cryptogram reply had said, "Box must have the prayer." But didn't they already know that, having given daily orders to plant it on Hubbard's body? "And all this time I thought it was you," I muttered. Flarge scratched at his flaxen hair. "I know. They tried to initiate me into all the Satanism stuff. Told me there were ways a chap like me might gain advancement in the academy. Never found out who's at the root of it, though. The question is, now we're on the same team, what are we going to do?" I looked the fellow over. I'd loathed his very guts for so long it was going to take an effort of will not to knock him down where he stood. At last I got to my feet, put out my hand, and Percy Flarge gripped it firmly and almost painfully. "Chums?" "All right, old boy," I said. "Chums. Now let's get the hell back to the cottage." We were back at the little house in minutes, but as soon as I saw the half-open door, I knew something was horribly amiss. Keeping close to the wall, Flarge moved to the worn step and kicked the door fully open. There was no one inside. Flarge and I exchanged glances, and I crossed swiftly to the back door. There was no sign of Delilah. With a horribly heavy heart, I began to mount the stairs, Flarge following closely behind, revolver cocked. I moved swiftly across the landing and threw open the door to Aggie's room. Expecting to find her dead, it came as something of relief to find the bed merely empty. "What now?" said Flarge glumly. "They've got Agnes, and they've got the prayer," I sighed. "What else can we do? We've got to get into that castle before the sacrifice begins." Outside, the weather had closed in, transforming the night into a howling maelstrom. The sleet-choked wind shrieked through the bare trees, and I clutched my leather coat about me as we set off towards the mountain. We soon cleared the tiny airstrip, but then had to battle for what seemed an eternity through dense, dark forest. It was fearfully hard going, and the snow that fell thickly onto our shoulders only added to the slog. It was shortly after we emerged beyond the tree line that we spotted them. Two huddled human shapes on the mountainside, snow already piling over their prone forms. We raced towards them, and I turned over the first, a massive, familiar bulk, still breathing, thank the Lord Harry. "Delilah." "Out cold," I muttered, examining her pallid features. Flarge had bent to uncover the second body, but suddenly cried out, stumbled onto his rear, and vomited into the drift. I trudged towards him and knelt before the second body. Rice Muller's skin was as shiny and black as rotten fruit. His eyes, fixed in an expression of absolute terror, rolled up horribly into the very limits of their sockets. And, tucked neatly into his breast pocket, was the silken fragment of the Jerusalem prayer. I whipped the relic from the corpse and plunged it into my coat pocket. Thinking back, it was clear that Rice Muller had lifted the wretched thing back in the cottage when he'd stumbled against me. Oh, what an ass I'd been. Delilah suddenly sat up and yelled in absolute terror.
"Oh, no! Oh, God!" she cried. "No! No!"
I tried to push her back down with a soothing hand. "It's all right, Delilah. It's me. Now just take it easy. Tell us what happened."
"The professor," she gasped. "He had some words with his boys and sent them off. Then he pulls a pistol on me and says, 'Get the girl.'"
Delilah flashed me a look of desperate appeal.
"He'd have shot me down there and then, sir, I swear it."
"It's all right," I soothed. "I understand. What happened then?"
"Well, I had to drag Miss Haggie downstairs, sir, and we set off for the castle. I thought we'd perish out here, sir, but the professor blasted his eyes. He says he had everything he needed now, and we must get to the tomb come hell or high water. It's his time, is what he said. I shall be the one the Prince of Darkness favours. Well, we got up here, sir, and then something awful happened, sir.
Go on. Delilah rubbed her jowls.
Miss Haggy sets up her terrible crying, sir, and the Professor tells her to shut her noise. But she says, "Can't you feel it? Can't you feel it?" And that's when I gets this horrible feeling.
I knew what was coming.
Then Miss Haggy points her head through the snow. I thought someone was coming to meet us, sir, but the Prof just lets out an horrible moan and fell to his knees. There was somebody there, Mr. Boggs, but it weren't human. His terrible face and the eyes on it.
I patted her hand. I know, Delilah. I know.
Then the Professor pulls out that blessed hanky and waves it about. "I'm here," he shouts. "I have come." But the thing just glares at him, and its eyes glowed red, and I don't remember no more.
I rose to my feet and turned to Percy Flage. I reckon Reismuller was operating on his own. He kept me alive just long enough to find out the identity of the perfect victim, then pickpocketed the relic from me and went in search of his destiny. He wanted the evil power for himself. Unfortunately for him, old Nick seems to have had other ideas. "And the girl?" said Flage. From the look of these tracks, Mons's men came along and took Aggie away, leaving Delilah to freeze to death. "And the relic? Why would they leave that?" I shook my head. I don't know. But what you don't know, Percy, is that this thing is also a kind of map. And what the late Professor and I discovered some time ago is that the location of the imprisoned Satan is located halfway up this mountain. We're almost there. Nearby, almost wholly concealed by the drifting snow, was the entrance to a disused post office railway tunnel. Dear me, but the Swiss are funny beggars. Why the hell would they build a post office railway inside a mountain? Nevertheless grateful for their eccentricity, I led our little party through the narrow entrance. It was a relief to be out of the howling gale, but as we progressed along the passage, we gradually became aware of a distant sound, a repetitive, throbbing beat, ominously reminiscent of the pounding drums at the Faust rally in New York. Gingerly we advanced, until at last we reached a ragged archway. Here the tunnel opened into a cathedral-like chamber, its ceiling festooned with dripping stalactites and the rock walls strung with vast black drapes, their surfaces beautifully worked in diabolical designs of crimson, azure, and gold. At the centre of the chamber stood a huge stone altar, draped in black cloth. I swallowed hard. On that altar sprawled Agnes Day, naked and seemingly insensible, her arms bound behind her back. Around her, wreathed in smoking incense, were scores of equally naked men and women, their faces covered by grotesquely carved animal masks. Pigs, wolves, and bug-eyed insects leered out of the miasmic gloom, chanting, writhing, and wildly gesticulating. Only 3 faces remained uncovered. My sister Pandora, swamped by a floor-length robe of Roman purple. Olympus Mons, who stood at a sort of lectern, naked and muscular beneath a long dark cape, and a corpulent figure clothed in black, his multiple chins wobbling over the tight collar. It was Joshua Reynolds, his eyes shining with depraved joy. Who was better placed to lure Percy Flage into his nefarious schemes than the head of the Royal Academy himself? Rage boiled within me, but I tried to suppress it and concentrate instead on the lectern before which Mons was standing. Upon it was stretched what I knew at once to be the remainder of the Jerusalem prayer, patched together like an exquisite quilt. The left-hand corner was missing. "He comes," bellowed Mons, "he that is spoken of. As it is written, so mote it be. All unknowing, he returns the last piece to the whole." I was so absorbed by this performance that at first I didn't notice the cold barrel of an automatic pressing into my neck. Whirling round, I groaned at the sight of amber-shirt guards depriving Flage of his Webley and others training their machine guns on Delilah. With a sharp jab in my side, I was propelled through into the incense-soaked chamber beyond. Mons paused in his declamation, his ruddy face suffused with delight. I smiled in clubbable fashion. "Oh, you've started without us, and I thought I was being fashionably late." "Welcome, brother," giggled Pandora. "At last you're here, and you've fulfilled your side of the bargain admirably." A cold wave of sickness passed over me. What bargain? What had I done? "Haven't you read your fragment of the prayer?" cried Mons, smiling. "It was written there the whole time." I gazed around the chamber, feeling utterly hollow. "All unknowing will he come," I quoted in a dull whisper. Mons nodded feverishly. "You were watched over by the Prince of Darkness himself. Knowing how close we had come to releasing him, he stretched out his terrible influence to ensure you came to no harm." Now I understood why that frightful apparition had sent the police off on the wrong trail back in Norfolk, and why Professor Rice-Muller had been rejected by the Dark Master he so longed to serve. It was essential that I, thick-headed dolt that I was, bring the silk relic back without ever knowing I was being used as its hapless courier. What had the cipher said? Box must have the prayer. "It was ours all along," laughed Mons, "but our plans tottered on the brink of collapse. For without the perfect victim, the prayer was useless." I looked over at poor Aggie, naked and insensate on the cold stone of that profane altar. "And I brought her to you, didn't I?" I whispered, utterly demolished.
"Practically gift-wrapped," tittered Joshua Reynolds, "with a little help from Professor Rice-Muller, poor sap."
My sister stepped forward and, after rifling my coat pockets, took the last fragment of the prayer and handed it with great ceremony to Olympus Mons. He smoothed out the ancient silk, placed it on the frame alongside the rest of the heathen text, and sweeping back his hair, advanced towards the altar where Aggie lay. Amber-shirt thugs swooped on Flage, Delilah, and myself, rapidly binding us at the wrists and pushing us down onto our rumps, Pandora supervising.
"Don't want you to miss the show, Lucy," she said cheerily, tying off the knots before slipping back into the throng. We could only gaze on in absolute horror as the obscene ritual was enacted before us, the most finished piece of blackguardism since Caligula ran amok. Poor Agnes still lay sprawled in her belly, rump in the air, whilst Mons intoned his hideous inversion of the Mass, kissing her all over at the points where a congregation would normally have muttered the responses. Pandora fell back, looking, I have to say, a little put out. "Choose me," she whimpered. "Why can't it be me? I know she's the perfect victim, but please, after the ritual's done, you know how I feel."
Mons shook his head and laughed. "You were only chosen to join my side after your luckless brother was selected to be the one, he who comes all unknowing. Now get back amongst the rest of my worthless slaves and keep your mouth shut." Pandora literally staggered where she stood. "Oh, crumbs," I cried. "Boyfriend trouble again, sis. Just like old times." Expecting the usual scowl, I was shocked to see the utter blankness in Pandora's face. She looked completely undone, and her skin showed waxy and deathly pale beneath the stinking unguents that covered it. Now Mons returned his attention to poor Aggie. A tiny silver blade, like a fruit knife, had appeared in his hand, and slowly, almost reverently, he moved towards her. But it was not to be. I was suddenly aware of a muttering voice from close by. At first I assumed that some hellish ritual was to accompany the dread moment, but to my astonishment I saw that Pandora had moved to one side, bending over the Jerusalem prayer on its frame, her lips moving quickly as she declaimed the ancient and forbidden text. Mons span round, appalled. "What are you doing? It's too early! Too early, you senseless fool!" He threw aside the little knife, and it clattered down the steps of the altar as Pandora's voice raced on, chattering through the ritual with almost supernatural speed.
"Cold! So cold!"
gasped Delilah.
What's going on?"
"Yes," whispered Flage. "I feel it too." A freezing draught crept through the darkness, colder than the snowy journey to the mountain, colder than anything I had ever known. "Something's coming," I hissed. "He is coming," crowed Flage, his voice tiny and broken in that dreadful dark place. For over the altar, forming in the very air, was the strange hazy smoke that I had seen out on the Stookie and again on the Norfolk Marsh. Just as before, twin points of red light suddenly blazed into life, but this time the apparition rapidly assumed a terrible solidity. The thing was gigantic. Wreaths of smoke wound round and round each other like the bindings on a mummy, until massive furry haunches, greasy and bestial, emerged from the murk. An awed gasp rippled through the assembly. A great human torso rose up above the legs, the skin oily with sweat, yet the stomach was covered all over in lurid green scales like those on a fish. At last the head was revealed, resolving itself around those pitiless red eyes in the shape of a sheep's head, vast shining horns projecting from the furrowed brow. Something moved behind me, and I yelled in terror, but it was only Percy Flage. The enterprising chap had managed to grasp Olympus Mon's abandoned knife between his heels and was dragging it towards him. Soon he was sawing desperately at the ropes that bound us.
"We can't escape," he hissed, "but there's a chance we might be saved. It's time to pray. Pray as you've never prayed."
I needed no urging, but still I struggled to remember anything even vaguely holy. "Jesus' hands were kind hands," ran the ludicrous voice in my head. "Onward, Christian soldiers," insisted another, but then something did come to me. Not a half-remembered prayer from school days, nor any invocation to the forces of light. It was something from that wretched silk relic, the part that Reismuller could not fathom. And only he that makes himself alone in the world can defeat the beast. The ram-headed creature had dropped its mighty head to gaze with horrible, patient desire at the prone body of Agnes Day, the perfect victim whose sacrifice would release it from its earthly prison. And only he that makes himself alone in the world can defeat the beast. I struggled to my feet. "Banebjet," I gasped. "Banebjet, hear me?" Mons turned in surprise, then let out a peal of laughter. "Oh, you really are persistent, Mr. Box. Well then, Lucifer, meet Lucifer." Pandora span round towards me, the tendons on her neck standing out like cords. Get back, you pathetic little man. This is our moment. The glory is ours." I didn't even look at her. "Banebjet," I cried. "It is I who brought the last fragment of the Jerusalem prayer to this unholy place. I am the one who found the Lamb of God. I am he that is spoken of. Is this not so?" Mons shrugged. "I cannot deny it. This man has done all these things. But I am the one who seeks your freedom." "Banebjet," I yelled, "do you acknowledge that I am he that is spoken of? Do you?" The ram-headed abhorrence seemed to consider for what felt like hours, rancid breath streaming from its nostrils and the black, black hole of its poisonous mouth. At last, the great head inclined downwards just a fraction. "Then," I bellowed, "being thus, I claim the right to send you back whence you came." Now Pandora was chuckling, You fool, you blind fool. You don't even know what you're saying. Only one who makes himself all alone in the world can do that. I looked at her. And I'm not alone, am I? I have you. My hand flew to my coat, and I whipped out the knife that Flage had used to slice through our bonds. Pandora's carmine smile fell. Then I dashed forward, and with one smooth action, cut a new and redder smile in her throat. Well, we'd never got on, had we? Mons staggered backwards, his bare feet clapping on the cold stone. "What have you done? What have you done?" Already the ghastly apparition seemed to be diminishing, as though it was being propelled backwards down a long, fathomless tunnel. "No!" screeched Mons. "Come back! You must come back!" The creature's body was unravelling, great strips of flesh and bone turning once again into the strange wispy blue smoke. "You!" raged Mons, pounding up to me and pummelling at my chest with his bare fist. "You have done this after all these years of planning and hoping and—" Suddenly he caught sight of the Jerusalem prayer still on its frame, and his face lit up as he raced towards it. "It's not too late. Of course it's not. I shall simply summon him back again." Flage hissed in my ear. "The Jerusalem prayer has already been misused once. For the same person to try it again is suicide. One must play by the rules." I goggled at Mons as he raced feverishly through the ritual, glancing every now and then over his shoulder, willing Banebched to reverse his trajectory. "He's crazy," muttered Flage. "We've got to get out." Banebched, its ghastly ram's head twisting and writhing in agony, was now vanishing fast, darkness enveloping its rancid fur and scaly flesh. Flames burst into life under Olympus Mons's jaw, and his lips drew back in one last snarl. There was a great whoosh of air, and orange fire exploded within his skull. Then he collapsed into a ball of flame that span round and round before hurtling straight into the maw of the creature, its jaws snapping shut with terrible finality. The scorched remnants of the Jerusalem prayer smouldered gently on the lectern. I raced towards the altar and scooped up Agnes in my arms. "Lucifer," she cried, tears streaming down her beautiful face, "you have saved me?" "I promised, didn't I?" I breathed. Delilah was by me in an instant, draping her own heavy coat over the poor naked girl. Enormous chunks of the cavern were coming loose now, peeling from the walls and ceiling, and the black satanic drapes that had decorated the place billowed and were torn asunder like the sails of a doomed pirate ship. The fang-like stalactites cracked and fell, spearing Mons's fleeing acolytes with deadly accuracy. Through clouds of choking dust, I spied the archway that led back into the post office tunnel. "This way!" I gasped. We inched along the tunnel on our knees, then rose to a semi-crouching position as we moved crab-like towards the tantalizing night beyond. I felt queasy with bending so low, and my legs cramped appallingly, but all at once I was through and breathing stunningly fresh mountain air. I turned round and dragged first Agnes, then Delilah, then Flage after me. There was a distant percussion from inside the mountain, and a last billowing cloud of choking smoke puffed from the tunnel exit like a dragon's last breath.
"Cool,"
croaked Delilah.
"What a night!"
I got to my feet and sighed heavily. Agnes Day bounced nimbly to my side, her lithe form all but invisible within Delilah's enormous trench coat. I ran my hand over her hair and smiled warmly. "We'd better get you home and warm, eh? You'll not last long in the buff." She chewed her lip and shuddered. That was shaming. I must have looked indecent. "Nuns training kicking in again, eh?" I shrugged. Well, it was nothing I hadn't seen before. She battered me playfully on the arm. "Brute, you are a beast, and I cannot think why I like you." "Well," I said, putting my arm around her shivering shoulders and pulling her to me, "better the devil you know, eh?"